next up we have Jay Leslie from the Cambridge Housing Authority. He's going to be talking about how the Cambridge Housing Authority has gone or is going passwordless. So Jay, welcome. Thank you.
Hi, so as David said, I'm Jay Leslie from the Cambridge Housing Authority, and let's see, the clicker. David, how do you go? Oh, thank you. Yeah, so Jay Leslie, Cambridge Housing Authority. And so last year I was here to do a presentation on our pilot of passwordless authentication at the Cambridge Housing Authority, and that went pretty well. We learned a lot of lessons from it. So we learned a lot of lessons, but I'll start off just do a recap. So what is Cambridge Housing Authority? We are based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we are a quasi-governmental nonprofit organization. And we have about 250 users altogether. And I think what makes us a little bit unique, especially compared to a lot of the organizations here, is the diversity of the organization. And that plays into how we've rolled out passwordless in a lot of ways. And for one thing, just background on Cambridge. So you think about MIT, you think about Harvard, you think about the higher education institutions in Cambridge. That's a huge chunk of it, but also there's a huge low-income population. There's a huge population of people who are unhoused. There are a lot of people with lower educational levels. And the Cambridge Housing Authority reflects that diversity. So we have people who have advanced degrees alongside people who have GEDs. And that really plays into how you implement something like this, because you just don't have the same kind of uniform user base that you might have in another organization. So just to recap a bit on our pilot. So in 2021, last year, we did a pilot of passwordless authentication where we tried to learn some lessons about how best to implement it and basically just kind of overcome some technical hurdles. And we hit a few hurdles during the implementation, one of which was getting a certificate authority set up. And we overcame that, and we learned a lot of lessons. And in 2022, we actually rolled out passwordless authentication at Cambridge Housing Authority. And we used Windows Hello for Business. And we went that route because we were primarily a Windows shop at the time. That has since changed. I'll get to that a little bit later. But at the time, we were almost solely a Windows shop. So it just made sense from a perspective of cost and simplicity. So we went that route. And our goal, looking at the technology, was, so just to back up a little bit, we were looking at implementing multi-factor authentication on devices, on endpoints, really. And doing research, we discovered FIDO and realized that, there's a much better way to do it. And basically, we came upon Windows Hello for Business through that FIDO research, which was great. So that was a great resource for us. And we wanted to implement something that was easy for users to pick up, and also that kept our system secure. So we decided to go to the approach where we start off with PINs, device-based PIN, because that's much like a password to users, and we figured that would lower the friction. And then I'd move them on later to biometrics, which is ultimately where I wanted to go for a lot of reasons, which I'll get to. But that's the interesting part. I think that's where a lot of the demographic differences really kind of make a difference. So what worked from our pilot? What worked during our full implementation? So we did a survey, and 82% of our users who use Windows Hello for Business really enjoy the experience of using a PIN versus a password, which is great. And I thought that was a pretty big success. There were very few technical issues, so we ironed those out in the pilot, I guess. So we had our certificate authority, and we had some trouble with that. That caused Windows Hello for Business to go down for a little bit. And for about maybe about a few weeks, people couldn't use their PINs or biometrics or anything like that. They had to fall back to passwords. But that was just the pilot group. But in our main implementation, we got through all that, and we really had no technical issues at all. What's more important, I think, for the group and for probably FIDO and for people trying to implement passwordless is, some of the things that went wrong, some of the problems we had with our experience. So uptake was a little lower than expected. And this is based on a survey that we did. And the survey is not scientifically, I wouldn't depend on it, really. It's not statistically valid. We had a pretty low return rate on the survey. But what we did find is that we had about 60% of our users actually using PIN or biometric login, really making full use of Windows Hello for Business. And so that fell short of our expectations. And some users didn't bother setting up passwordless. And that's kind of our bad in a lot of ways. We were focused so heavily on rolling it out and making it available that I don't think we did enough follow-up with users, trying to get them to really see the importance of that transfer. It's starting to go in the other direction now. We do have a bit of a push to get people to have a better uptake of the technology, but it's going to take a lot more work, I think. And this is where some of the bifurcation comes in demographically. So what we found after we did the survey, I spoke with a lot of our users just anecdotally at the water cooler, at their desks, and asked them kind of where they were with the technology. And we found that for departments that were comprised of our more educated users, more of the master's degree holders and above, uptake was great. So they were using PINs. Some of them were using biometrics. And I'd say for those users, almost all of them have dropped passwords completely. That changed when we get down to our more client-facing staff. Our more client-facing staff really are probably more reflective of the population we serve, which is great. They're not always the most computer-savvy people, and sometimes in IT, like when we did the pilot, I think we really focused on, almost like friends and family, which is not the way you do the pilot. So it's the people that you really know are going to love the technology and have a good uptake. And for them, most of them, that was fine. We did have some other people in the group, but for the most part, it was an education breakdown. And the people who really understood the benefit of using a 6-character PIN versus a 16-character password, or a 6-digit PIN versus a 16-character password, they got it. The uptake was pretty great. Other people's a little spotty, so we need to really kind of refocus the way we sell the technology. And then among the people who were in the pilot group, when their certificate authority went down, a lot of those users decided that the technology was not really stable, and they decided not to really go to it completely. They looked at it and said, oh, well, I know my password works. This PIN may not necessarily work long-term, so I'm going to stick with passwords. So again, that's more of an education thing, and it's just something we really need to work on and think about as we go forward with passwordless. And this is not the end of the road for us, but I think it's a good start. The only technical issue that came about really it wasn't so much of a technical issue as much as it was a staff growth issue. So when I did this presentation last year, Cambridge Housing Authority had about 180 computer users. Due to an ERP system implementation, we brought on about 70 blue-collar users, most of whom never really used computers before, and we gave all of them tablets. They all have Android tablets now, which is great. We've got them trained up on the tablets, and that's fantastic. The problem is that a lot of them they're people who, they run the range. Like we have an electrician in our organization who's fantastic. He's almost like somebody I've deputized into IT to do a lot of the work for us in the field, and he's great. But he's not necessarily representative of all of his colleagues. So a lot of them they're plumbers, they're electricians, they're people who do inspections on units. They're great. It was never really in their job plan to use a tablet or to log into a computer. So that's taken a lot more hand-holding than we'd anticipated, and we actually didn't know they were starting, so it's not something we really could plan for. It's kind of like, oh, surprise, you've got 70 more users that you hadn't planned on. But, we're getting through it. And actually, we've deputized a lot of so the electrician I spoke about, we've deputized him and some of the younger blue-collar staff who are a little more computer savvy, not to be ageist. I'm getting up there myself, but we deputized a lot of our younger staff to do some of the training. And I think that's working out pretty well. So that's something where we're kind of using staff themselves to kind of evangelize the push toward passwordless. And part of what also happened with staff increase is we had older laptop incompatibility. So we had trouble getting enough new laptops to all the users who needed them. So I had to end up pushing into production a lot of the machines that I actually taken out of production. And some of those machines are out of production for a very good reason, like the TPM chips weren't working anymore. So, when that happens, a lot of things don't work. The encryption was down, so we had to make sure those machines stayed as much in the organization as possible. But also, they couldn't use Windows Hello for Business, so the passwordless for them didn't work out at all. we are in the process now of kind of replacing those machines with newer machines, but that's another unanticipated consequence of just kind of reality in life in an organization. I mentioned the ERP rollout. So we had brought in consultants to really help us with that rollout. So our IT staff, we've got about 250 users, 4 IT staffers, and 23 locations. So we plan to bring in consultants to help with the ERP rollout. Long story short, the consultants didn't quite work out the way we thought, so my IT staff got pulled back into helping with the ERP rollout, which took a lot of attention away from the passwordless. So I talked a little bit about the sharp increase in mobile use. So I think we chose Windows Hello for Business initially because most of our staff were Windows users. We're really a Windows shop. We're not primarily a Windows shop anymore. Now we have probably, I'd say about 90 tablets out there, tablets, smartphones, and Windows Hello for Business is not the best option for those. It doesn't work on those. So we're looking into other solutions that we can augment our passwordless with so that those devices will be covered as well. But we're also rethinking a lot about the technology we chose to begin with. And it's a journey. I felt a little bad about it in the beginning, but it is a journey. It's something where you can't really let yourself get too down about it. You just have to move forward and realize that you're doing the right thing. You're moving in the right direction. Next steps. And I probably got ahead of myself and mentioned some of our next steps, but one big thing is that we're working passwordless authentication or phish-resistant authent by FIDO standards into our IT strategic plan and our cybersecurity strategic plan. And the goal there is to get a lot more push from the top. MFA was an easy sell for our executive director. He's not so sold on specifically, ironically enough, the biometric aspect of it. The exact location where I want to go is where he's like, well, I don't want to use my fingerprint. I don't want my biometrics out there. So it's going to take a lot more education to kind of get him on board. But I think I can sell this pretty easily. Well, maybe not super easily, but it's something I can sell. It's not impossible. And I think once we get that buy-in from the top, we'll be able to really reevaluate our initial rollout of passwordless and have something where we get the whole organization on board with it. So we're also doing a passwordless training intensive, and that's scheduled to start at the end of this year through the first quarter of next year. And that's where we're going to really go in person, department by department, all through 23 of our sites. We're probably going to have to hire outside help to help us with this, and actually show people how to set up their passwordless. And, for example, there's some things like just enrolling your fingerprint. It's, for a lot of us, it's just like you roll it. You tap, tap, tap until it really learns you, until it gets your fingerprint down. For some of our users, we found that after a couple iterations, after a couple taps, they give up and they say, you know what, I'm just going to use my pen. And so they don't really go that way. Replacing older laptops we talked a little bit about. So we're actually going to replace all of basically our next refresh is going to cover all of our older laptops, and we will have brand new machines for everyone with nice new TPM 1.2 chips, and it should be just fine. And I think that that's going to really eliminate that barrier to passwordless authentication pickup. And also, we're kind of selling the benefits of another passwordless method that works on cell phones. We're going to augment this as well, but before we actually choose a new solution, we're going to, since we are a Microsoft shop, in our tablets, the logins are tied to our MS infrastructure. We're going to try to get bigger uptake on phone login. And it's not a final destination. It's more of a stopgap until we get something else in place. One of the other password technologies. So if any vendors out there, I'll be talking to you sometime this week, probably between today and tomorrow, about how best to get that rolled out in our organization. And I think that's going to be a huge success. But as a gap, we're going to take advantage of what we already have and get not two-factor, but get passwordless authentication rolled out that way. Biometric resistance. And so I just want to talk a little bit about this. And I can't remember her last name, but Stephanie Schucker. Thank you, Stephanie Schucker. I wish I had spoken to her before I came up here, but so a lot of the resistance I hit was around the biometric experience. And some of this was things that you would kind of expect. Like for different ethnicities, for example, like, for people of darker skin tone like myself, I found that facial recognition doesn't always work as well unless the environment is absolutely perfect. If you're front lit, it's fine. But I found that if you try to train the device in, like, my office, which is not the best lit place, it can be pretty sketchy. And the other thing I was worried about with biometrics is that I didn't consider it a final destination because pins are great. They're phish resistant. They don't really address the physical security aspect of authentication, though. And what I mean by that is, although we have administrative policies that say don't write your passwords or your credentials down on a sticky note and leave it on your machine, it's going to happen. It's just unavoidable. And the administrative policies are nice, but as long as there's a possibility of someone writing down a pin and sticking it on a sticky note on their laptop or their tablet eventually, I think that's a hole that exists that we address most of the aspects of passwordless authentication that would really help the organization. But as long as that gap's still there, I'm not really comfortable. So we have to find a way to replace pins with biometrics or something else. And I guess part of the way we want to address that is to address the reasons why people haven't really picked up biometrics as much as we expected. And I mentioned some of the ethnic differences with facial recognition. It turns out there's also demographically related differences with fingerprints as well. So I know my wife can never use a fingerprint login on anything. It just does not work. For myself, it works all the time. So I tend to fall back to fingerprint versus facial. And that's something where I think it's probably an industry thing. Like I know in Stephanie's presentation this morning, she mentioned that there are algorithms that work better with this than other ones. And I think part of it's a vendor issue, and part of it's about vendors just kind of catching up and coming up with better ways to implement biometrics. Setup difficulty is something we talked about. So I found it hard to train my computer to recognize my face. Fingerprints are easier, but as I said before, a lot of people just get fatigued of keep trying to train their fingerprints and keep trying to get that going. So they really haven't picked that up. So that's something we want to work on as well. And then there's privacy concerns. So especially with my executive director, one of his huge concerns is the idea that, oh, Jay, if I use my fingerprint to log in, someone can steal that credential and then they're going to be me forever. And it's a concern that I've heard a lot. Even among IT security people like 5 years ago, that was a really serious concern that people had. With FIDO technology, that's not a concern, but it takes a lot of education to get people to the place where you get them past that point. And I'd say we're going to wrap up a little bit, but the last major issue we had with biometrics was even among people who liked it. We have laptop users. Our laptops are often docked, and when it's docked, usually the fingerprint reader is inside the laptop. So I guess for myself, and selfishly, I was like, well, yeah, that's a problem. So when I bought myself an external fingerprint reader, I was like off to the races. But then I realized that you need to do that for the whole organization if you actually want them to use fingerprints. And that's something where if you're going to fix it, you would look to vendors to have better placement of a fingerprint reader. Maybe put them on docks, maybe put them on a mouse, maybe put them on the outside of the laptop, maybe on the lid. So we talked a little bit about the ethnic differences in fingerprint definition. It's Scandinavians and I believe a lot of Asian people have fingerprints that can be less defined. So that has, from what I've read, that can be a problem. That kind of links back to some of the issues that people have with fingerprint recognition. And also older people who are a little more, I think older people and people who are dehydrated. Probably older because over time, maybe your fingerprints wear down, I'm not sure. But interestingly enough, even dehydration can cause that. It just causes changes in your skin that cause it not to read as well as it could. So we talked about the facial differences. I know we're running short on time. Biometric skepticism, we talked a little bit about that. I got ahead of myself a bit. But the takeaways here, I think, for implementing passwordless is consider your IT staffing capacity. just know that it's going to take a lot more of a push and a lot more weight on your staff than you think it will. Consider other projects. We had this big ERP project that came up that we didn't think we were going to have to be as involved with, but it turns out that we did, and it's just something we had to work through. But those are the things you want to consider before you kind of embark on a passwordless push. And also, think long-term about your environment. Whatever your environment is today, it could be very different by the time you actually implement your passwordless solution. And in our case, if we had anticipated that Androids are going to be such a large component of our infrastructure, we would have chosen probably completely different technology, something that unified things a little bit more. And I think those are the main takeaways that we have. Back to biometrics, I think there's not really much to say about that. There's resistance that we have to overcome as enterprises and in the vendor community. We just have to come together and find a way to make this work as well as we can for people. But I think it's a surmountable problem. It's just going to take a lot of work. And that's all I have. Thank you.